I never thought I would spend $3,000 defending my right to park something nobody could even see. But here I was, sitting across from a lawyer named Gerald with 15 years of HOA dispute experience, and a sympathetic expression that told me he had heard it all before. My name is Zachary Young, and I bought my house in Riverside, California 3 years ago. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom ranch-style home with a 2-car garage, big windows, and enough space for my growing family. My wife Olivia and I fell in love with it immediately. The neighborhood was called Sunset Ridge Estates, one of those master-planned communities that promised family-friendly amenities, well-maintained common areas, and a sense of community. What they did not mention in the glossy brochures was that the homeowner association would become the bane of my existence. Everything started about 6 months ago when I bought a recreational vehicle. It was not even a massive one, just a 24-foot Class C motorhome that I planned to use for weekend trips with Olivia and our 2 kids. I had always dreamed of taking the family on road trips across the country, visiting national parks, teaching my children about the beauty of America beyond their tablets and video game consoles. The RV was in excellent condition, barely used by the previous owner, and I got it for a reasonable price. The thing is, I knew the HOA rules. I had read them cover to cover before we even made an offer on the house. Section 12. Paragraph 4 stated that no recreational vehicles, boats, trailers, or commercial vehicles could be parked in driveways or visible from the street for more than 24 hours. I understood that rule. Nobody wants to live in a neighborhood that looks like a used car lot or a storage facility. But I had a solution. My garage was deep, and with some careful maneuvering and a few modifications to our storage system, I could fit the RV completely inside with the garage door closed. It took me an entire Saturday to reorganize everything. I moved our holiday decorations to the attic, installed some wall-mounted shelving for tools and sporting equipment, and convinced Olivia to park her sedan in the driveway. Once everything was arranged, the RV fit perfectly inside the garage. When the door was down, you could not see a single inch of it from the street. Problem solved, or so I thought. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March. It was in my mailbox along with the usual credit card offers and grocery store circulars, except this envelope was different. Heavy cream-colored paper with the Sunset Ridge Estates logo embossed on the front. I opened it while walking back to the house, and my good mood evaporated as I read the contents. Dear Mr. Young, it has come to the attention of the Sunset Ridge Estates Homeowner Association Board that you are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Community Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. A recreational vehicle has been observed on your property. You have 10 days to remove this vehicle or face fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Sincerely, Barbara Henderson, HOA President. I stood in my driveway, reading the letter 3 times, trying to make sense of it. A recreational vehicle had been observed on my property. That was impossible. The RV had not left my garage since I parked it there 2 weeks ago. I walked around to the front of my house and looked at it from every angle a passerby might see. The garage door was completely closed. There was no way to see inside. Not from the street, not from the sidewalk, not even if you stood on your tiptoes and tried to peek through the small decorative windows at the top of the garage door. Olivia was in the kitchen making lunch when I came inside. She took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I handed her the letter without saying anything. She read it, her dark eyebrows drawing together in confusion. But the RV is in the garage, she said, stating the obvious. Nobody can see it. That's what I thought too. I'm going to call them and clear this up. It must be a mistake. The number for the HOA management company was printed at the bottom of the letter. I dialed it and was put on hold for 7 minutes, listening to a loop of soft jazz that did nothing to calm my growing irritation. Finally, a woman answered. Sunset Ridge Estates Management, this is Paula speaking. Hi Paula, my name is Zachary Young. I live at 2847 Oakmont Drive. I just received a violation letter about an RV on my property, but there must be some mistake. The RV is completely inside my garage. Nobody can see it from the street. There was a pause and the sound of typing. Let me pull up your file. Okay, yes, I see the violation here. It was reported by Mrs. Henderson during her neighborhood inspection on March 15th. But what exactly did she see? The RV is inside my closed garage. More typing. The notes say recreational vehicle on property. That's all the detail I have, Mr. Young. Can I speak with Mrs. Henderson directly? I think if she understands the situation, we can resolve this quickly. Mrs. Henderson is very busy, but I can pass along your message. However, the violation stands until the board reviews your case at the next meeting. When is that? The fourth Thursday of the month. That would be March 28th. I did some quick math. That was 16 days away. Well past the 10-day deadline they had given me. So what happens in the meantime? The letter says I have 10 days. If you haven't resolved the violation within 10 days, fines will begin to accrue. You can contest them at the meeting. I felt my blood pressure rising. This is ridiculous. I'm not violating any rule. The RV is completely out of sight. Paula's voice remained professionally neutral. I understand your frustration, Mr. Young. I recommend documenting the current state of your property with photos and presenting them at the meeting. Is there anything else I can help you with today? What I wanted to say and what I actually said were two very different things. I thanked her through gritted teeth and hung up. Over the next few days, I did exactly what Paula suggested. I took photos from every angle. I measured the garage to show the RV fit completely inside. I reviewed the HOA documents again to confirm I was not missing anything. Section 12. Paragraph 4 said vehicles could not be visible from the street. Mine was not visible. I was in compliance. The 10-day deadline came and went. On day 11, another letter arrived, informing me that I was now accruing fines of $100 per day. I immediately sent an email to the HOA management company with all my photos attached, explaining the situation in detail. I received an automated response saying my email had been received and would be reviewed. The days crawled by. I heard nothing from the HOA. The meeting date approached, and I cleared my evening schedule to attend. The meetings were held in the community clubhouse, a Spanish-style building near the neighborhood entrance with a pool, fitness center, and multipurpose room. I arrived 15 minutes early and was surprised to see about 30 other homeowners already there. Apparently, I was not the only one with issues. The room was arranged with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs facing them. I took a seat near the middle and pulled out the folder of documentation I had prepared. At 7 o'clock sharp, the board members filed in. Barbara Henderson was immediately recognizable. She was a woman in her mid-50s with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that required weekly salon visits. She wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, pearl earrings, and an expression that suggested she took her role very seriously. Two other board members flanked her, a balding man who was introduced as the treasurer and a younger woman who served as secretary. Barbara called the meeting to order and launched into reports about the neighborhood budget, upcoming landscaping projects, and pool maintenance schedules. 45 minutes passed before they finally reached the violations section of the agenda. My stomach tightened. "We have several violations to address this evening," Barbara announced, consulting a printed list. "First up, we have Mr. Zachary Young of 2847 Oakmont Drive regarding an unauthorized recreational vehicle." I stood up, clutching my folder. "May I address the board?" Barbara looked up, her expression already disapproving. "You may approach." I walked to the front of the room, acutely aware of 30 pairs of eyes watching me. I opened my folder and pulled out the photos. "Mrs. Henderson, board members, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I do own an RV, but it is stored completely inside my garage with the door closed. As you can see from these photos, it is not visible from the street at any time." I laid the photos on the table in front of them. Barbara barely glanced at them. "Mr. Young, we are aware that the vehicle is in your garage." I blinked, certain I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The vehicle is in your garage, we know this." "Then I don't understand the violation. Section 12, paragraph 4 prohibits vehicles from being visible from the street." "Mine isn't visible." Barbara folded her hands on the table with the patience of someone explaining something to a slow child. "Mr. Young, the spirit of the rule is to maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Recreational vehicles are prohibited, regardless of whether they are visible." "But that's not what the rule says. I read it very carefully before purchasing the RV." The treasurer leaned forward. "The board has the authority to interpret the covenants, conditions, and restrictions as we see fit." I felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. "You're telling me I can't park a vehicle inside my own garage even though nobody can see it?" "That is correct," Barbara said firmly. "The RV must be removed from the property or stored in an approved off-site storage facility." "This is insane. I bought this house partially because the garage was large enough to store an RV. I specifically checked that I would be in compliance with the rules." Barbara's expression hardened. "Mr. Young, I suggest you watch your tone. This board works very hard to maintain the standards that make Sunset Ridge Estates a desirable place to live. If you wanted to store recreational vehicles on your property, perhaps you should have purchased a home outside of an HOA community." The dismissive way she said it made my hands clench into fists. I forced myself to take a deep breath. "I would like to formally contest this violation and the associated fines. This is an unreasonable interpretation of the rules, and I believe it exceeds the board's authority." "Your objection is noted," Barbara said, making a checkmark on her paper. "The violation stands. You have 30 days to comply before we pursue legal action. Next item on the agenda." I stood there for a moment, stunned, before gathering my photos and walking back to my seat. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. I barely heard the other violations being discussed. Something about a homeowner who painted their front door the wrong shade of approved beige, and someone else who had installed window shutters without architectural approval. When the meeting finally ended, I walked out into the warm California evening feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Olivia was waiting up for me when I got home. She was curled up on the couch with a book, but I could tell she had been watching the door. "How did it go?" she asked. I slumped down next to her and told her everything. Her expression went from confused to angry to disbelieving. "They can't do that," she said. "That's not what the rule says. Apparently they can do whatever they want. Barbara Henderson acts like she is running a small dictatorship." "So what do we do now?" That was the question I had been asking myself the whole drive home. We could sell the RV, but that felt like letting them win. We could move, but we loved our house and our kids were settled in good schools. Or we could fight. "I think we need to talk to a lawyer," I said. That was how I ended up in Gerald Patterson's office 2 days later. His practice specialized in real estate disputes and HOA conflicts, and his Yelp reviews suggested he was both competent and sympathetic to homeowner rights. He was in his early 60s with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept pushing up his nose as he reviewed the documents I had brought. "This is interesting," he said after 20 minutes of reading. "The CCRs are very clearly written. Vehicles cannot be visible from the street. Your RV is not visible from the street. You are in compliance." That's what I thought, but they are claiming they can interpret the rules however they want. Gerald nodded slowly. HOA boards do have some interpretive authority, but it's not unlimited. They cannot create new restrictions that are not supported by the actual language of the governing documents. This would be like a traffic law that prohibits speeding in school zones, and then a police officer decides to give you a ticket for speeding on the highway because it is in the spirit of the law. So can we fight this? You can. The question is whether you want to. These cases can be expensive and time-consuming. Even if you win, and I think you would win, you are looking at several $1,000s in legal fees and months of stress. I thought about it, about the principle of the thing, about Barbara Henderson's condescending expression, about not wanting to live in a place where a handful of people could make up rules on the fly. "I want to fight it," I said. Gerald smiled slightly. "All right then, let's get started." The first step was to send a formal letter to the HOA board outlining our legal position. Gerald drafted something professional but firm, explaining that the violation notice was not supported by the actual language of the CCRs, and that continued harassment would be met with legal action. We sent it certified mail so there would be proof of receipt. The response came faster than I expected. Less than a week later, another letter arrived from the HOA's attorney. It was 10 pages of dense legalese, but the basic message was clear. Remove the RV or face escalating consequences, including liens on the property. "They are playing hardball," Gerald said when I showed him the letter. "This is actually good for us. It shows they are overreaching. It doesn't feel good. It feels like they are trying to bury me in paperwork and intimidate me into giving up." That's exactly what they are doing. HOA boards often rely on the fact that most homeowners cannot afford to fight them. But you have a strong case, Zachary. We just need to stay the course. Staying the course meant filing a lawsuit. Gerald prepared the paperwork, and we filed in Riverside County Superior Court, seeking declaratory relief that I was in compliance with the HOA rules and an injunction preventing them from imposing fines or taking further action. We also asked for attorney's fees under California Civil Code Section 5975, which allows homeowners to recover legal costs in HOA disputes if they prevail. The legal process moved with all the speed of a glacier. Months passed with motions and counter-motions, discovery requests, and depositions. The fines continued to accrue on paper, though Gerald assured me they would not be enforceable if we won. Still, it was stressful seeing the numbers climb. By summer, the HOA claimed I owed them over $15,000. The situation became increasingly absurd. Barbara Henderson seemed to take my lawsuit as a personal affront. Suddenly, my property was being inspected with microscopic attention. I received violation notices for things I did not even know were rules. My lawn was supposedly half an inch too tall. The decorative rocks in my flower bed were not an approved type. The basketball hoop my son used in the driveway was allegedly a safety hazard and aesthetic concern. Each notice had to be responded to, documented, and added to our legal case. It was harassment, pure and simple, and Gerald said it was actually helping our case by demonstrating a pattern of overreach and retaliation. The stress affected everything. Olivia and I snapped at each other over small things. My work performance suffered because I was constantly distracted by the latest HOA nonsense. My daughter asked me one night why we had to live somewhere with so many rules. I did not have a good answer. The one bright spot was discovering I was not alone. As word spread through the neighborhood about my lawsuit, other homeowners started reaching out. There was David, 3 streets over, who had been fined for planting roses that were the wrong color. There was Margaret, who received a violation for hanging a bird feeder that was supposedly visible from the street and not architecturally consistent. There was Thomas, who made the mistake of starting a small home-based accounting business and got hit with violations about commercial activity, even though clients never came to his house. We started meeting informally, sharing stories and frustrations. It became clear that Barbara Henderson and her board had been running Sunset Ridge Estates like a fiefdom for years, and most residents either did not know they could fight back or were too afraid of retaliation to try. "We should recall the board," Margaret suggested during one of our backyard meetings in July. "If enough homeowners sign a petition, we can force a special election." It was a good idea, but the HOA's bylaws made it deliberately difficult. We would need signatures from 51% of the homeowners, and there were over 200 homes in Sunset Ridge Estates. Still, we decided to try. We drafted a petition, printed flyers explaining the recall process, and started going door to door. The response was mixed. Some homeowners were enthusiastic and signed immediately. Others were sympathetic, but afraid of becoming targets themselves. A significant number seemed to support Barbara and the board, believing that strict enforcement of rules, no matter how petty, was necessary to maintain property values. One woman, Karen Peterson, who lived on the same street as Barbara, actually yelled at me when I knocked on her door. She was in her early 50s, perfectly coiffed and absolutely furious that I was trying to undermine the HOA. "People like you are going to ruin this neighborhood," she shouted, her face reddening. "If we let everyone do whatever they want, this place will turn into a slum. Rules exist for a reason." "I'm not asking to do whatever I want," I replied calmly, though my patience was wearing thin. "I'm following the rules as written. The RV is in my garage, completely out of sight. Barbara told me all about your situation. You are trying to find loopholes and exploit technicalities. That's not what this community is about. Actually, following the written rules is not a loophole. It's just following the rules." Karen stepped forward aggressively. "You need to leave my property right now or I will call the police." I left, but the encounter rattled me. The level of hostility was unhinged. These people acted like I was trying to tear down civilization itself, rather than simply park a vehicle in my own garage. Despite the obstacles, we managed to collect enough signatures by late August. We submitted the recall petition to the HOA management company, along with a formal request for a special election. Under the bylaws, the election had to be held within 60 days. Barbara's response was predictable. She sent a letter to all homeowners claiming the recall effort was orchestrated by a small group of troublemakers who wanted to turn Sunset Ridge Estates into an unregulated mess. She listed all the improvements the board had made during her tenure, from repaving streets to upgrading the pool facilities, and warned that new leadership would jeopardize these achievements. The letter was effective propaganda. Several homeowners who had signed the petition contacted us nervously, asking if they could remove their names. We had to explain that was not how it worked. The petition had been submitted and the election was happening. Meanwhile, my lawsuit was progressing toward trial. Gerald was confident but realistic. "The law is clearly on your side," he told me during a meeting in September. "But judges have a lot of discretion in these cases, and some are more sympathetic to HOAs than others. We have Judge Patricia Morrison, and she has a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. She won't tolerate any games from either side." The trial was scheduled for late October, just a few weeks before the recall election. The timing was coincidental, but it felt symbolic. Both battles would be decided within days of each other. As the trial date approached, I found myself growing more anxious rather than less. We had a strong case, but nothing was guaranteed. I kept thinking about what would happen if we lost. Would I have to sell the RV? Would the HOA place a lien on my house for the accumulated fines? Would Barbara and her board become even more emboldened to harass residents who stepped out of line? Olivia was my rock through all of it. She never once suggested I should just give up and sell the RV, even though it would have been the easier path. She attended every court appearance, helped organize the recall campaign, and reminded me on my worst days why we were fighting. "It's not really about the RV anymore," she said one night as we lay in bed, unable to sleep. "It's about whether we live in a community with reasonable rules fairly enforced, or under a dictatorship where a few people can make up whatever they want." She was right, of course. The RV had become a symbol of something much larger. The trial began on a Tuesday morning. The courthouse in Riverside was a modern building with high ceilings and harsh fluorescent lighting. Judge Morrison was a black woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened intently as Gerald made our opening statement, laying out the facts of the case and the clear language of the HOA's own governing documents. The HOA's attorney, a slick younger man named Richard Brennan, argued that the board had broad discretionary authority to interpret rules, and that my RV, even inside the garage, violated the spirit of the restrictions against recreational vehicles. "Your Honor," he said with practiced smoothness, "if we allow homeowners to circumvent the rules through technical compliance, it opens the door to all manner of violations. Someone could store a commercial truck in their garage, or a boat, or any number of vehicles that degrade property values. The board must have flexibility to protect the community." Judge Morrison asked the question I had been waiting for. "Counselor, what specific language in the governing documents gives the board authority to prohibit vehicles that are not visible from the street?" Richard hesitated for just a moment. "The language about maintaining property values and the board's general enforcement powers. But the specific rule about vehicles says they cannot be visible from the street, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, but that must be read in context with the broader purpose of the restrictions." "I see. Continue." The trial lasted 3 days. Gerald presented our evidence methodically. Photos showing the RV was completely concealed. Testimony from me about my research into the rules before purchasing the RV. Expert testimony from a real estate attorney about standard interpretation of HOA covenants. Documentation of all the retaliatory violations the HOA had suddenly started issuing after I filed suit. The HOA's case was weaker. They tried to argue that other homeowners had complained about the RV, but under cross-examination, it became clear that Barbara Henderson was the only one who had actually reported it, and the complaints came only after she told people there was a violation. They tried to present evidence about property values, but their own expert admitted under questioning that a vehicle stored invisibly inside a garage had no impact on neighboring home prices. The most damaging testimony for the HOA came when Gerald cross-examined Barbara herself. She took the stand wearing another immaculate suit, her expression confident bordering on smug. Gerald started gently, asking about her role on the board and her commitment to the community. Then he pivoted. "Mrs. Henderson, when did you first become aware that Mr. Young had purchased an RV?" "I saw it being driven into his garage in March." "You saw it being driven in?" "Yes." "And then what happened to it?" "He parked it in the garage." "And after he parked it in the garage, was it visible from the street?" Barbara shifted slightly. "Not from the street, no." "So it was in compliance with Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the CCRs. In a technical sense, perhaps, but not in spirit." "Mrs. Henderson, can you point to any language in the governing documents that prohibits vehicles stored invisibly inside a garage?" "The board has the authority to interpret the rules." "That is not what I asked. Is there specific language prohibiting what Mr. Young did?" "The rules must be interpreted reasonably." "Mrs. Henderson, please answer the question. Is there or is there not specific language prohibiting vehicles stored invisibly inside a garage?" A long pause. "Not in those exact words, no." "And yet you issued a violation notice anyway, because it violates the spirit of the rules." Gerald moved to his next line of questioning. "Mrs. Henderson, how many other homeowners in Sunset Ridge Estates have vehicles stored inside their garages that you cannot see from the street?" "I don't know." "You don't inspect garages?" "Of course not. That would be invasive." "So it's possible that dozens of homeowners have boats, trailers, or other vehicles stored inside their garages where they are not visible from the street?" "It's possible." "And you've never issued violations to any of them?" "I have no way of knowing what people have in their garages." "But you knew about Mr. Young's RV because you happened to be watching when he drove it in." "I was conducting a neighborhood inspection." "Do you often watch individual homeowners' properties closely enough to see what they park in their garages?" Barbara's composure cracked slightly. "I take my duties seriously. I notice things." "Did you notice Mr. Young's RV specifically because you had some other issue with him?" "No." "You have no personal animosity toward Mr. Young?" "Of course not." Gerald pulled out a document. "Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence this email from Mrs. Henderson to the other board members dated February 20, 1 month before the violation notice was issued." He handed copies to the judge and to Richard Brennan. "Mrs. Henderson, can you read the highlighted portion for the court?" Barbara's face went pale. She read in a flat voice. "I noticed the new owner at 2847 Oakmont has been leaving his garbage cans visible from the street past the pickup deadline. We need to be vigilant about enforcement with new residents so they understand we take the rules seriously." "So you were already watching Mr. Young's property and looking for violations before the RV issue?" "I monitor the entire neighborhood." "But you specifically mentioned his address in an email about needing to be vigilant about enforcement." "That sounds less like general monitoring and more like targeted scrutiny." "I object to that characterization." Judge Morrison intervened. "Mrs. Henderson, you are not the attorney here. Just answer the questions." The cross-examination continued for another hour, with Barbara becoming increasingly defensive and contradictory. By the time Gerald finished, it was clear that this was not about rules enforcement, but about a power struggle with a homeowner who had dared to question the board's authority. Judge Morrison took the case under submission, meaning she would issue a written ruling rather than deciding from the bench. Gerald said this was normal for complex cases, but the waiting was excruciating. The decision could come anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. The recall election was held first. It took place on a Saturday in mid-November at the community clubhouse. The voting lasted from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening, and homeowners could either vote in person or by proxy if they had submitted paperwork in advance. Our group volunteered as election monitors, making sure everything was conducted fairly. The atmosphere was tense. Barbara and her supporters were also there, watching everyone who came to vote. Karen Peterson, Barbara's neighbor and most vocal defender, stationed herself near the entrance and glared at anyone she recognized as part of the recall effort. At one point, she accused Margaret of campaigning too close to the voting area, which led to a heated argument that had to be broken up by the management company representative overseeing the election. When voting closed, the ballots were counted by a neutral third party. The results were announced at 7 o'clock. The recall had passed with 57% of votes in favor. Barbara Henderson, the treasurer, and the secretary were officially removed from the board. A new election for their positions would be held in 30 days. I felt a surge of relief and vindication. The homeowners had spoken. They were tired of petty tyranny and wanted reasonable leadership. Barbara left the clubhouse without a word, her face stony. Karen followed her out, but not before shooting me a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," she said as she passed me. I had no idea how right she was. Judge Morrison's ruling came down 3 days later. Gerald called me as soon as he received it, and I could hear the smile in his voice. We won. Complete victory. I sat down heavily in my desk chair at work, feeling tears prick my eyes. What did she say? She ruled that the HOA's interpretation of the vehicle restrictions was not supported by the plain language of the governing documents. She issued a declaratory judgment that your storage of the RV inside your closed garage is in full compliance with the CCRs. She granted an injunction prohibiting the HOA from imposing fines or taking any action related to the RV, and she awarded us full attorney's fees. How much are the fees? $18,000. The HOA has to pay them. I could barely process it. We had won. Not only had we won, but the HOA had to pay for the privilege of losing. Gerald, I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by enjoying your RV and not letting anyone tell you that you can't use your own property reasonably. You stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have given in. That takes guts. When I got home that evening, Olivia met me at the door with champagne. She had somehow already heard the news. We celebrated with the kids, explaining in terms they could understand that the unfair rules were gone and Dad had been right all along. My son asked if this meant the basketball hoop could stay. I told him absolutely. That weekend, I took the RV out for the first time in months. We drove to Joshua Tree National Park, just Olivia and me, leaving the kids with her parents. We hiked among the alien rock formations, slept under a sky full of stars, and remembered why we had wanted an RV in the first place. It was not about defying the HOA. It was about freedom and adventure and making memories. But back in Sunset Ridge Estates, things were far from settled. The new board election was scheduled for mid-December. Our recall group had candidates ready, people who believed in reasonable enforcement and transparency. We thought it would be a straightforward win after the recall success. We were wrong. Barbara Henderson might have been removed from the board, but she still lived in the neighborhood and she still had supporters. She and Karen Peterson organized their own slate of candidates and ran a surprisingly sophisticated campaign. They sent mailers to every home warning about the dangers of lax rule enforcement. They held meetings at Karen's house, painting themselves as the victims of a hostile takeover by homeowners who wanted to trash the neighborhood. The rhetoric got ugly. Someone started a rumor that I was planning to open an RV rental business from my garage. Another rumor claimed that the new board candidates wanted to eliminate all rules entirely. Neither was remotely true, but facts seemed less important than fear. On the day of the election, Turnout was massive. Over 80% of homeowners voted either in person or by proxy. When the votes were counted, the results shocked everyone. The election was nearly tied, with our candidates winning by a margin of less than 3%. We had won, but barely. The new board took office in January, and true to their word, they focused on reasonable enforcement of clearly written rules. Violations were issued only for genuine problems, not petty nonsense. Communication improved. The neighborhood started to feel less like a police state and more like an actual community, but Barbara and Karen were not done. In February, 2 months after the election, I received a certified letter. This time it was not from the HOA. It was from the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. I opened it with shaking hands, unable to imagine what it could be about. The letter requested my cooperation with an investigation into potential misuse of HOA funds. Specifically, they were looking into payments made by the previous board to the law firm that had represented them in my lawsuit. According to the letter, an anonymous complaint had been filed alleging that Barbara Henderson had authorized payments to the law firm that were not properly approved by the board and may have been used for purposes beyond defending the HOA. I called Gerald immediately. "Did you know about this?" "I heard rumblings," he admitted. "The new board did an audit of the HOA's finances and found some irregularities. They were legally obligated to report it to authorities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind where Barbara may have been using HOA money to pay for personal legal advice that had nothing to do with HOA business. The bills from Brennan's firm were vague and lumped together multiple matters. When the new board asked for detailed invoices, the numbers did not add up." Over the next few months, the investigation unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. It turned out that Barbara had been using HOA funds to pay for her own legal disputes, including a property line disagreement with a neighbor and a business matter related to her husband's company. She had disguised these expenses by having them billed through the same firm that was handling HOA matters, and because she controlled the board, nobody questioned it. The total amount of misappropriated funds was over $40,000. In California, that level of embezzlement is a felony. In August, nearly a year and a half after I first received that violation notice about my RV, Barbara Henderson was arrested and charged with embezzlement and misuse of nonprofit funds. The HOA, as a California corporation, was legally a nonprofit entity, and misusing its funds for personal benefit was a serious crime. The news rippled through Sunset Ridge estates like an earthquake. Even Barbara's most ardent supporters were shocked. Karen Peterson tried to defend her at first, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and political persecution, but the evidence was overwhelming. Barbara had signed checks to herself disguised as reimbursements for HOA expenses that never happened. She had authorized payments to contractors who turned out to be friends who had done work on her personal property, not common areas. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Barbara pleaded not guilty initially, but as more evidence emerged, her attorney negotiated a plea deal. In March of the following year, she pleaded guilty to felony embezzlement and was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. I attended the sentencing hearing. I am not sure why. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted to see justice actually happen. Barbara looked smaller somehow, diminished in her plain clothes without the armor of her blazer and pearls. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she apologized to the community in a voice that sounded more tired than remorseful. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Barbara had made my life miserable over something absurd, and it turned out she was also a criminal. But seeing someone's life unravel completely, even someone who had been my antagonist, was not as satisfying as I had imagined. Karen Peterson moved out of Sunset Ridge Estates shortly after Barbara's sentencing. The new board continued to run things sensibly. Property values did not collapse because people were allowed to store vehicles in their garages or plant roses that were not on the approved list. In fact, the neighborhood felt more alive, less sterile. Kids played basketball in driveways. People chatted with neighbors without fear of being reported for some trivial violation. My RV sits in my garage right now, ready for our next adventure. We have taken it to Yosemite, Sequoia, Grand Canyon, and a dozen other places. My kids are learning to appreciate the natural world, and Olivia and I have strengthened our marriage through shared experiences and the knowledge that we can face challenges together. Sometimes when I pull into my driveway, I think about how close I came to just giving up and selling the RV to avoid the hassle. If I had done that, Barbara would still be running the HOA like her personal kingdom, and who knows how many other homeowners would have been bullied into compliance with unreasonable demands. Standing up to petty tyranny mattered. It mattered for me, for my family, and for the community. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about the importance of reading governing documents carefully before buying into an HOA, about the necessity of holding leaders accountable, and about the danger of giving any group unchecked power over others. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining communities, but they require oversight and limits. Gerald and I stayed in touch. He continues to represent homeowners in disputes with overreaching HOAs, and he tells me my case has become something he references frequently with clients. It is a perfect example of how clear language in governing documents matters, and how boards cannot simply make up rules based on their interpretation of spirit rather than actual words. The $18,000 in attorney's fees that the HOA had to pay came from their reserves, which meant every homeowner in Sunset Ridge Estates essentially paid a small amount for Barbara's overreach. Some people resented that. They felt I should have just complied rather than creating an expensive legal battle. I understand that perspective, but I disagree with it fundamentally. The cost was not my fault. It was the result of Barbara's refusal to follow her own rules and her decision to double down rather than admit she was wrong. In the end, my fight was never really about an RV. It was about the principle that rules should be clear, fairly applied, and actually mean what they say. It was about not letting bullies win simply because they have a title and organizational authority. It was about standing up for reasonableness in a world that sometimes seems to have forgotten what that word means. Now, when I see new families moving into Sunset Ridge Estates, I make a point to introduce myself and let them know about the HOA's history. Not to scare them, but to encourage them to stay informed and engaged. An HOA is only as good or as bad as the people who run it and the homeowners who pay attention. Apathy enables abuse of power. My garage door is closed right now, and behind it sits my RV, perfectly legal, perfectly compliant, and perfectly ready for our next family adventure. I fought for $3,000 in legal fees, endured 18 months of stress and harassment, and helped expose embezzlement that put someone in jail. All because I wanted to park a vehicle in my own garage where nobody could see it. Was it worth it? Every single day when I look at my house and know that I stood up for what was right, when I take my family on trips that create memories we will treasure forever, When I see a neighborhood that is healthier and more reasonable than it was before, I know the answer is yes. It was absolutely worth it. The final irony is that the HOA's own governing documents now explicitly state that vehicles stored completely inside garages are permitted regardless of type, as long as they are not visible from the street. The new board added that clarifying language to prevent any future misinterpretation. My case created precedent and actual policy change. Something good came from all the chaos. Olivia and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary last month with a trip in the RV to the Oregon coast. We parked at a campground overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and as we sat outside watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Remember when we thought buying that RV would be a simple way to take family trips?" I laughed. "Nothing is ever simple." "No," she agreed. "But we figured it out together. That is what matters." She was right. The HOA battle tested our relationship, our finances, and our resolve. It could have broken us. Instead, it proved that we could face adversity as a team and come out stronger on the other side. That is worth more than any RV or any lawsuit victory. As for Barbara Henderson, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was released from jail after serving 12 months of her sentence. She moved to another county, trying to start over somewhere her name was not associated with embezzlement and HOA abuse. I hope she learned something from the experience. I hope she understands now that power without accountability corrupts, and that trying to control others through petty regulations is a miserable way to live. Karen Peterson, Barbara's former ally, apparently moved to a non-HOA neighborhood in Arizona. I guess she decided that living under strict rules was only appealing when she was not the one being scrutinized. The last I heard, she was happy with her new home and its complete lack of architectural review committees. The new HOA board has been in place for over 2 years now, and Sunset Ridge Estates is thriving. Property values have actually increased, despite the dire warnings from Barbara and her supporters that relaxing enforcement would lead to neighborhood decline. Turns out that treating adults like adults, trusting people to maintain their properties without constant surveillance, and focusing on actual problems rather than manufactured violations creates a better community. I still serve on the Architectural Review Committee as a volunteer. I never wanted to be deeply involved in HOA governance, but after everything that happened, I felt an obligation to help ensure the new approach continued. We approve almost every reasonable request and deny only things that would genuinely impact neighbors or violate local building codes. It is not complicated when you approach it with common sense rather than power-hungry rigidity. My kids are older now, more aware of the world and its complexities. My son asked me recently why I spent so much time and money fighting over where we parked the RV. I told him that sometimes you have to stand up for what is right even when it is hard, even when it would be easier to give in. I told him that rules should make sense and be applied fairly, and when they are not, good people have an obligation to speak up. He thought about that for a moment and then said, "So you were like a superhero fighting a villain." I smiled. "More like a regular person fighting bureaucratic overreach, but sure, we can go with superhero. The truth is more mundane than comic book heroics, but no less important. I was just a guy who wanted to use his property in a reasonable way, and refused to be bullied into compliance with a nonsensical interpretation of written rules." The fact that this somehow became a 1.5-year legal battle that exposed embezzlement and led to jail time for an HOA president is a testament to how far things can spiral when unchecked power meets unchecked ego. Looking back now, I can see all the points where things could have gone differently. If Barbara had simply acknowledged that the RV was not visible and backed down, none of this would have happened. If I had sold the RV immediately rather than fighting, she would have remained in power and probably would have continued her financial misconduct indefinitely. If the homeowners had not rallied together to recall the board, the investigation into missing funds might never have been triggered. Every decision mattered. Every person who signed the recall petition, every dollar spent on legal fees, every hour spent documenting violations and gathering evidence contributed to the final outcome. Change does not happen through one grand gesture. It happens through sustained effort by people who refuse to accept that wrong is inevitable. I am proud of what we accomplished in Sunset Ridge Estates, but I am also aware that the battle against petty tyranny is never fully won. Every HOA, every homeowner association, every organization with power over others requires constant vigilance to prevent abuse. The moment people become complacent, the moment they decide it is easier to go along than to question authority, that is when tyrants small and large begin to emerge. So I stay involved. I pay attention at board meetings. I speak up when I see the old pattern starting to re-emerge, the tendency to create rules for the sake of rules, to prioritize control over community. Most of the time, a gentle reminder is enough. Sometimes it takes more. But the lesson of my RV battle stays with me. The cost of fighting for what is right is always less than the cost of surrendering to what is wrong. My RV is parked in my garage right now, completely out of sight, exactly where it belongs. And every time I see it, I am reminded that I live in a place where reasonable people can disagree, where rules are meant to serve the community rather than control it, and where one person's willingness to stand up against absurdity can actually make a difference. That is the real victory, more than any court ruling or election result. It is knowing that home is not just a building or a piece of property, but a place where you can live with dignity, free from arbitrary harassment, governed by rules that make sense and leaders who understand that their power comes with responsibility. The sun is setting over Riverside, California, and I am sitting in my driveway watching my kids play. Tomorrow we might take the RV out for a weekend trip, or we might just leave it in the garage where it is safe and ready for whenever we need it. Either way, it is my choice to make in my house on my property, under rules that I actually agreed to when I bought this home. And that freedom, that basic dignity of being treated like a responsible adult capable of making reasonable decisions, is worth every bit of struggle it took to preserve it.